I was the master of a great house, educated overseas. When my nation was in peril, I returned without hesitation to join the military and defend my homeland. I died at the Battle of Midway, only to awaken in a new era of peace. They told me I was the true son of the wealthy Vance family, swapped at birth. By the time I was found, the family had already formed an unbreakable bond with the boy who had taken my place. The false son looked down on me, his voice dripping with condescension. The Vance Empire will never be handed over to some hick from the sticks. You shouldn't covet what isn't yours. I sighed softly. You were raised to be the heir to a corporation. I was meant to serve my country. You and I are on different paths. It's best we go our separate ways. His brain practically short-circuited. When I came to, I was sitting on the floor with a splitting headache, a flood of unfamiliar memories pouring into my mind. Standing a few feet away was a boy of about 17 or 18, Caleb Vance, the one who had taken my place. He was coolly warning me not to desire things that didn't belong to me. But my attention was captured by the television in the living room. A news anchor was reporting a recent discovery off the coast of Midway Atoll. The wrecks of 3 ships, including the USS Vindicator, had been positively identified as key vessels lost in the historic World War II battle. The screen showed images of rusted artillery shells and blackened metal plaques. That was once my life. I was born at the tail end of an era, a time of global turmoil and encroaching threats. After completing my studies in naval engineering in Britain, I immediately enlisted, becoming an officer in the U.S. Navy. The memory of that battle made my eyes sting. Amid the deafening roar of cannons and bombers, every man on my ship fought to the last. No one chose cowardice. But as we went down, our hearts were filled with despair. We couldn't hold the line. We didn't know what horrors would befall our countrymen once the invaders landed on our shores. I used the sofa to pull myself to my feet and walk toward the TV. The memories flooding my brain told me that the brutal, humiliating war against foreign aggression we had eventually won. The old world order was gone, the aggressors had surrendered, and the nation had been reborn, stronger than ever. My brothers in arms could finally rest in peace. A fire ignited in my chest. Squabbling over an inheritance, this drama of the true and false son. It was all meaningless in the face of what truly mattered. As a witness to this country's darkest hour, I would carry the legacy of that era's heroes forward. I would continue to protect this nation in this new age. Caleb noticed the tears in my eyes and snapped irritably. I barely pushed you. You're not even hurt. Ethan, you can stop playing the victim to test Mom and Dad's limits, he said, using my new name, Ethan Hayes. No matter how many times you force them to choose, they'll always choose me. You're just embarrassing yourself. I finally turned my gaze to him, my brow furrowed. I have never met someone so shameless, so capable of twisting the truth. You are the beneficiary of a crime, I stated calmly. Your biological relatives were criminals. On what grounds, and with what right, do you stand here before me, the victim, and spew this nonsense? Just then, a young woman stormed into the living room, placing herself protectively in front of Caleb. Ethan, I don't care who you are, but the man I'm going to marry is Caleb. My family, the Lynns, only recognizes him. Her name was Brooke Lynn, the sole heiress of an old money Boston family. The Vances had worked tirelessly to secure this engagement for Caleb. Brooke had no interest in the family business. Marrying her meant that the Lynn and Vance fortunes would one day be his. Seeing Caleb's pale, shaken expression, Brooke's heart ached for him. You've gone too far, Ethan, she yelled, rushing at me with her hand raised to strike. I caught her wrist mid-air and, with a gentle push, sent her tumbling onto the sofa. The body I now inhabited had grown up doing manual labor in a small town in upstate New York. It was strong. These pampered heirs were no match for it. I looked down at her. Does your privileged background give you the right to ignore facts, to twist right and wrong, and to assault people at will? Caleb's eyes flickered, a calculated look flashing across his face. He held Brooke up and shouted at me, Ethan, how dare you lay a hand on Brooke? A nearby housekeeper, looking shocked, quickly ducked away, phone in hand. I gave Caleb a cool glance, a complicated mix of disappointment and pity churning within me. This new era had no great wars. People had enough to eat, children could go to school, and they lived lives of comfort my generation couldn't even have imagined. Our predecessors paid with their lives for this peace, yet these privileged children weren't thinking about giving back to their country or finding purpose. They were consumed by power plays and petty schemes. I let out a soft sigh. I won't fight you for it. The family, the company, the engagement, they're all yours. You were raised to be the heir to a corporation, I said. I was meant to serve my country. You and I are on different paths. It's best we go our separate ways. The two of them stared at me, dumbfounded, as if serve my country was the most bizarre thing they had ever heard. Brooke looked at me with suspicion. The Vances are one of the most powerful families in Boston. Do you hick, have any idea what Vance Industries is worth? My gaze didn't linger on her. I simply nodded once at Caleb and turned to go upstairs. We weren't on the same wavelength. Talking further was a waste of breath, and I had no intention of wasting my time on them. Back in my designated room, I took stock of my situation. I was 17, recently brought to Boston by the Vances. In an attempt to foster a brotherly bond, they had enrolled me in the same elite private prep school as Caleb. I was set to start my senior year, with only 6 months left until graduation and the college application deadlines. The good news was that I had previously studied abroad and completed my degree at a prestigious university. My new body's high school transcript showed a focus on STEM fields, and I could understand most of the math and physics. Back in my time, the purpose of sending students overseas was to learn Western languages and industrial technology to strengthen our own nation. All that knowledge was still in my head. After the Great War, the nation had developed at an astonishing pace, but some high-end industries still relied on foreign technology. I had to learn more. Wherever the country needed me, that's where I would direct my efforts. But a century had passed in the blink of an eye. Everything was different. First, I needed to adapt. That afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Vance rushed home. When I was called downstairs, Brooke's parents, the Lynns, were also sitting in the living room. Mr. Vance's face was grim when he saw me. When he turned to the Lynns, however, his expression softened into one of weary apology. You know our situation. The boy grew up in the country. Nobody taught him any better. He's only been back a short while, and we haven't had time to correct his behavior. Mr. Lynn sat stonily, saying nothing, but Mrs. Lynn was indignant on her daughter's behalf. I've never laid a finger on my Brooke in her entire life, and now she gets pushed around by a Richard, she said, turning to her husband. I think we should just call off this engagement. The kids are still young, after all. Mr. Vance was silent for a moment. Then he looked at me. Ethan, come over here and apologize to Brooke and her parents. Mrs. Lynn scoffed. What good is an apology? Mr. Vance walked to a corner of the room, picked up one of Caleb's baseball bats, and started toward me. I watched him, expressionless, though I was growing tired of these theatrics. As he swung the bat toward the back of my knees, I shot out a hand and clamped down on his elbow. He cried out in pain, and the bat slipped from his grasp into mine. To the astonishment of everyone in the room, I snapped the baseball bat over my knee and tossed the two pieces to the floor. Do you see? I asked, my voice even. If I had truly attacked her, would Miss Lynn be sitting there completely unharmed, stirring up trouble? I looked at Brooke, who was now sobbing hysterically. Miss Lynn, would you care to demonstrate exactly how I laid a hand on you? Brooke's face froze. For all her bluster, she was still young, and the guilt in her eyes was impossible to hide. I pointed to a security camera mounted outside the first-floor window. That camera has a clear view of the sofa, doesn't it? Why don't we pull the footage and see what really happened? Mr. and Mrs. Lynn now understood their daughter was at fault. Their righteous anger evaporated. It's just a squabble between kids, Mr. Lynn said gruffly. We shouldn't get involved. Let's just drop it. Having been publicly contradicted, Mr. Vance was furious. He turned to Caleb. Caleb, you tell me. What happened? Caleb hesitated. Before he could speak, Brooke once again shielded him. Uncle Vance, it was all my idea. If you're going to blame someone, blame me. It has nothing to do with Caleb. She shot me a venomous look, her bravado returning. I just can't stand him. He's just a country bumpkin, but he always acts so high and mighty. Caleb is the heir you and Auntie raised. Why should he have to put up with this guy's attitude? I laughed softly. Caleb, is that how you see it, too? Then I turned to Mr. and Mrs. Vance. And is this what you both believe? Caleb lowered his head, silent. His position was too awkward. Anything he said would be wrong. Mr. Vance said nothing, while Mrs. Vance looked torn. But after a moment, she cast an apologetic glance my way and remained silent. I glanced at the grandfather clock on the wall. They had already wasted 15 minutes of my time. Why did I grow up in the country? Because Caleb's biological mother was a human trafficker? It was darkly ironic. The woman was a respected maternity ward director who secretly used her position to run a child trafficking ring. After seeing the Vance's wealth, she got greedy and swapped her own nephew, Caleb, with me. Then she had me sent away to a poor family in a rural town. While Mr. Vance grew up in luxury, I was beaten and verbally abused in his relative's home. I worked from dawn until dusk and fought for every opportunity one had to stay in school. I looked at my biological parents. When the police found me, they insisted I return with you because I was still a minor. I told you then that I had only one condition, that I be allowed to finish high school and apply to college. After that, we would owe each other nothing. If you didn't want that, you could have sent me to a group home, but you insisted on compensating me. Is this your compensation? Me giving Caleb an attitude? What right does a hick like me have to give him an attitude? Has there ever been a time when I opened my mouth before someone accused me of slighting him on his behalf? I turned to Caleb. Don't bother with your petty schemes around me. Hiding in the shadows, goading others to fight your battles for you. Do you really think everyone is a fool? You all pride yourselves on being high society, looking down on me for my rural upbringing. But the character, the heritage, the grace that is supposed to come with that station, do you possess any of it? Don't insult the term old money. Mr. Vance's expression was complicated. Caleb's face was ashen. Mrs. Vance instinctively pulled Caleb into a comforting embrace. Brooke was furious. Ethan, what did Caleb ever do wrong? Why can't you just leave him alone? He's been through enough. Mr. Lynn looked like he couldn't take another second. It was his own foolish daughter who was being used as a pawn. He stood up and addressed Mr. Vance. Richard, this is your family's affair. We'll be leaving now. We can't talk about this later. Brooke was reluctantly dragged away by her mother, shouting over her shoulder, Caleb, don't worry. I'm on your side. I will marry you. I swear. I found the whole scene tedious. In the memories I'd absorbed, I knew that women in this era were equals, that society was full of sharp, independent women. For someone with Brooke's personality to have made it this far, her parents must have had their hands full. I turned to go upstairs. Ethan, Mr. Vance called out from behind me. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes held a deep sense of powerlessness. The family situation is more complicated than you think. For now, can you try to be a little more tolerant? I looked at him quietly, my thoughts drifting to the father from my past life. That man had been a stern, unyielding patriarch, yet when the nation was in crisis, he had liquidated his fortune to support the military. He had always been a strict father, and only on the day I left to join the Navy did I see his eyes turn red. The man standing before me now was not that man. It has never been me, I told Mr. Vance, who started these conflicts. The next morning, Mr. Vance drove Caleb and me to school. While he was handling my enrollment paperwork, I told him I wanted to live in the dorms. He refused, pulling me aside. The whole city of Boston knows we brought you home, he said sternly. If you move into the dorms at a time like this, what will people say about the Vance family? The human trafficking ring had been a major news story, broken up by a federal task force that then launched a nationwide search for the victims' parents. The story had gone viral. There was no hiding it. I explained patiently. My conflict with Caleb is irreconcilable. As I've said, no matter how many times I state that I have no interest in the family business, he will never believe me, and you will always have to guard against me harming him. It's better this way, I continued. You can tell people that because of my background, I'm behind academically and need to live on campus to focus on my studies. Meanwhile, you can use this time to groom Caleb properly. He's planning on going to university abroad and isn't taking the SATs anyway, correct? Mr. Vance's face went from pale to flushed. He must have realized by now that I was not a son he could easily manipulate. He sighed. Ethan, I've set up a trust for you. It will ensure you're comfortable for the rest of your life. You've suffered a great deal. All your mother and I want for you is a future of security and ease. but our company. Even if I gave it to you, you wouldn't know how to run it, he said. Caleb has been attending business functions with me since he was a child. He was involved in his first company project at 14. I checked my watch, cutting through his emotional speech. Fine. Now, please go sign the dormitory application. Classes are about to start. The dorms at this elite prep school were more like studio apartments, each with its own kitchenette, bathroom, and a small balcony. It offered a space for independent living and study, far from the Vance family drama. For me, it was the perfect solution. After Mr. Vance left, the homeroom teacher led me to the classroom. This is Ethan Hayes, he said with a warm smile. For the next 6 months, he'll be joining us to prepare for college applications. A wave of murmurs and snickers went through the class. A Vance? Is that the son they brought back from the countryside? Hey, Hayes, I heard people out in the sticks don't shower much. You got fleas on you. Oh my God, what if he has lice? The room was filled with bright, privileged young faces, now twisted in mockery, all looking for a show. Brooke, sitting next to Caleb, smirked triumphantly. Clearly, this was another one of her games. My expression remained unchanged. That's right. I'm the son the Vance family brought back from the country. By some grace, I continued, my voice steady. I was able to study and make it to high school despite a difficult environment. I've taken a lot of beatings and received a lot of kindness to get here. It hasn't been easy. I cherish this opportunity to learn, and I have no desire to waste time on anything else. For the next 6 months, I hope we can coexist peacefully and all graduate successfully. The classroom fell silent. They probably hadn't expected such a direct response. The boy behind Brooke, who had started the jeering, looked confused. Is he like quoting a movie or something? He whispered. No one answered him. The other students wore varied expressions. Caleb's fists were clenched, clearly unhappy that I had brought up a past that implicated his own parents. Surprisingly, Brooke looked a little guilty. Several of the girls looked at me with sympathy. They were, after all, just kids who hadn't seen much of the world. They might be arrogant, looking down on my rural origins and easily influenced by gossip, but they weren't malicious enough to want to crush someone from a lower social class. The teacher was pleased. We are 6 months away from final exams, he said sternly. Whether you're planning to go to college in the States or not, I expect all of you to behave for this final stretch. The school's curriculum was rigorous. At first, some students waited for me to make a fool of myself. But after seeing me confidently answer questions in advanced calculus and physics, they decided I wasn't a source of entertainment and began to ignore me. I threw myself into my studies, using every spare moment. The textbooks alone were a revelation, showing me the incredible, world-altering changes that had occurred. I began to integrate my past knowledge with a new curriculum. My practice test scores in the sciences jumped from the low 60s to the high 80s. A month after I enrolled, we had our midterm exams. These were standardized across the state, a good benchmark of where I stood. When the results were posted, right before winter break, I stared at the rankings with a deep frown. Out of more than 300 students in my grade, I ranked around 150th. In the state, that put me somewhere past 5000th. To get into a top-tier university with a competitive major, I needed to be at the very top of the state rankings. After all, for college admissions, I'd be competing against students from across the entire country. After picking up my report card, Mr. Vance called and told me to come home with Caleb for the break. The dorms would be closed, but returning to the Vance house would be a major disruption to my studies. Although Caleb had been less confrontational lately, he still occasionally incited Brooke and her friends to stir up trouble, which was a constant annoyance. If I had the quiet, reserved personality of my body's original owner, I would have been a prime target for bullying. I couldn't afford to waste a month-long winter break on them. I planned to rent an apartment to focus on studying, I told Mr. Vance. The SATs are just around the corner. Every day counts. Since I was still a minor, I need the Vance's help to sign a lease. Mr. Vance sounded hesitant. Our family and the Lynns have spent Christmas together for years. This year, we all agreed to go to Aspen. Miss Lynn doesn't like me, I reminded him. If I go, it will only cause more drama. He sighed. I understand. I stayed an extra night in my dorm room. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Vance came to see me. They took me to an apartment in a high-end complex downtown. The building was quiet and elegant. Mrs. Vance and a housekeeper started unpacking things. "Your mother picked this place out herself," Mr. Vance told me. "We bought in your name. From now on, if you ever feel uncomfortable at home, you can come here." I nodded. "Does Caleb know? He's already worried about you favoring me." "What if?" I trailed off when I saw Mr. Vance's uncomfortable expression. I understood. Caleb had undoubtedly been given much more. I felt a pang of sorrow for the boy whose body I now occupied. He had genuinely wanted his parents' love and approval. He had never been loved in his short life. When he first came to the Vance family, he tried to get along with Caleb. He constantly backed down, swallowing his grievances to avoid causing trouble for his parents. Unfortunately, his very existence was a threat. His mother, afraid of upsetting the son she raised, kept her distance. His father, after weighing the pros and cons, also chose the adopted son. Caleb had won their hearts, yet he couldn't stop feeling threatened by the true heir. The Lynns, meanwhile, let Brooke run wild, constantly testing Caleb's standing in Mr. Vance's eyes. The more secure Caleb's position, the more confident the Lynns would be in the marriage alliance. I didn't know where the original Ethan's soul had gone, if it still existed, or if it would ever return. But I couldn't bring myself to forgive the Vances on his behalf. When they gave up on him, they didn't even give him a fair chance to compete with Caleb. I hope that in his next life, he find a family filled with love. On Christmas Eve, I took a break to watch TV. There was a special on about the nation's ambitious plans for space exploration. Every time I saw these programs, my blood surged with excitement. I felt an urgent desire to be a part of it, to contribute to the country's future. But for now, my knowledge was too limited. I had to get into a university with the best faculty to receive the best possible guidance. After watching for a little while, I dove back into my intense study schedule. Having been educated in Britain in my past life and working for a time as an interpreter, my English was impeccable. As for literature, many of the classic poems and texts were ones I had memorized on my grandfather's knee as a child. My essays were eloquent and powerful. My teachers often read them aloud in class as examples. For math and the sciences, I did nothing but practice problems, memorizing formulas, and analyzing my mistakes. 1 or 2 practice tests weren't enough. I worked through hundreds. In February, the school held the first of its major pre-college standardized practice tests. This time, I ranked in the top 50 in my grade. Based on the previous statewide results, that would likely place me in the top 1,000 in the state. In April, during the second major mock exam, I finally broke into the top 10 in my grade, with a projected state ranking in the top 100. My English and math scores were nearing perfection, and my combined science score was well over 90%. Still not good enough. I could do better. I started using every break between classes and even my lunch hour to drill problems, my speed and accuracy increasing daily. After this second mock exam, Mr. Vance began calling me frequently, asking about my life. While many students at this school didn't need high SAT scores for their future, the teaching staff was exceptional. Top-performing students were expected to take the exams and score well, even if they already had offers from prestigious international universities to bring glory to the school. The school had produced numerous state and national top scores. Mr. Vance had probably heard about my academic surge and decided it was unwise to put all his eggs in the Caleb basket. In the last few months, the boisterous Brooke Lynn had quieted down considerably. Once, she even approached me alone to say that as long as I didn't cause trouble for Caleb, she would leave me alone. Caleb himself had initially asked if I wanted to come home for weekends, but after being repeatedly rebuffed, he stopped asking. Once my grades improved, the taunt from my classmates disappeared, not that I ever cared. It only proved that at any time, in any place, it's best to demonstrate strength before you speak. In late May, the school held its final practice exam before the real SATs. This time, I was ranked first in the grade. My science score was nearly perfect. My homeroom teacher was ecstatic, rubbing his hands together. "Ethan, my boy, just keep your cool. As long as nothing goes wrong, you're a shoo-in for the Ivy League." He walked with a new bounce in his step, as if he had already coached a national champion. In June, fully prepared, I walked into the testing center with thousands of other students. After one day of blistering heat and another of torrential rain, the 6-month battle I had fought was finally over. After the exams, I didn't go home. I went back to my apartment downtown. Mr. and Mrs. Vance were not pleased. They felt that since the tests were over and even Caleb was no longer bothered by my presence, there was no reason for me to hold a grudge. A family shouldn't keep score. My simple reply, "That was never my home," silenced them. Mrs. Vance was hurt and bewildered. "Since you came back, we've given you everything you wanted. Why are you so distant from us?" I let out a small, mirthless laugh. If I were still that uncultured kid from the country, with no manners, no grace, and no good grades, would you still want to be close to me? The original Ethan was just that, a quiet boy from a rural town, afraid of making mistakes, ignorant of the so-called etiquette of high society, constantly embarrassing himself. At that time, Mr. and Mrs. Vance had been nothing but ashamed of him. From the very beginning, between me and Caleb, you never once chose me. You agreed to let me live on my own to placate Caleb, didn't you? The sight of me is a constant reminder of his shameful origins. It's better for everyone if we're apart, isn't it? Since you made your decision long ago, you should stick with it. Don't look back and don't have regrets, because the Ethan Hayes who craved a family's love is already gone. Your change of heart is worthless. Mr. and Mrs. Vance were silent. I started packing my bags. A few months prior, I had written a letter to NASA outlining a series of questions I had about aerospace technology. A female engineer had taken the time to write back a long, handwritten letter that answered every one of my questions in thoughtful detail. At the end of her letter, she invited me to visit the launch site at Cape Canaveral after my exams to witness a satellite launch in person. Who from a century ago could have imagined that humanity would one day explore the moon and Mars? The nation's booming aerospace program was a powerful symbol of its comprehensive strength. In the past 100 years, so many brilliant scientists had given up lucrative positions abroad to return and build their homeland. These pillars of the nation had held up the dignity of the American people. I was overcome with emotion. In a bygone era, I had been willing to die for my country without a second thought. In this new age, I was just as proud to be an American. I took a flight down to the city near the launch base in Florida. There, I got a job at a night market food stall, bussing tables and taking orders. I spent my evenings chatting with tourists from all over the world, sharing stories and learning about their lives. On the day my SAT scores were released, I was at the Kennedy Space Center watching a rocket ascend into the sky. A strange, powerful feeling washed over me. The rocket tore through the sky above me, piercing the clouds, breaking through the atmosphere, and racing toward the stars. One incredible, magnificent feat of engineering. Just as my excitement peaked, my phone rang. It was Mr. Vance. His voice was loud and jubilant. "Ethan, you got a 1590. You have the top score in the state." My emotions settled into a profound calm. On the other end of the line, he was excitedly talking about throwing a party, but I suddenly cut him off. "Father, we're even now. Thank you for your help over the past 6 months. In a few days, I'll be 18. According to the law, an individual 18 or older is a legal adult, with full capacity for civil conduct, and can act independently. From now on, I am my own person, and the Vance family is the Vance family. I will not be coming back." There was a long silence on his end. I smiled, a genuine, light-hearted smile, and ended the call. As the state's top scorer, I didn't apply to Harvard or MIT, as everyone expected. Instead, I applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. The decision caused a minor stir in Boston. My phone was blowing up with calls, but I ignored them all. I returned to Boston for my physical examination, and, at the downtown apartment, I left the credit card Mr. and Mrs. Vance had given me. I had used the prize money from my academic awards to pay back my tuition and expenses from the past 6 months. I left a note saying I would cooperate fully with transferring the apartment's deed. While waiting for my acceptance letter, I took a trip to the small town in upstate New York where the original Ethan had grown up. The human traffickers responsible for his fate had all been brought to justice. I didn't go into the village itself, but on a quiet hill behind it, I paid my respects to the boy whose life I now lived. When I returned to Boston again, I ran into Caleb. I was at the school to pick up my acceptance packet, and he was there waiting for me. He hadn't taken the SATs and was set to go abroad with Brooke after the summer. He must have gotten his driver's license because he was leaning against a red sports car in the alley behind the school, a shortcut to the bus stop. When he saw me, He opened the passenger side door and gestured for me to get in. I didn't move. He closed the door and walked over. "Can we talk?" I couldn't help but sigh. I thought I'd made myself clear. "Caleb, you don't need to worry about your position in the family changing while you're out of the country." I held up the thick envelope in my hand. "I'm going to military academy." The pretense finally dropped. For the first time, he looked at me with undisguised hatred. "You're infuriating, Ethan Hayes. Why did you have to come back? My family was happy. Then you showed up, and suddenly Mom and Dad are always miserable because of you. You don't even live with them, and now they worry about you even more. Don't give me that nonsense about blood ties," he sneered. "Blood doesn't mean anything in this world. What matters is fate. You were born to suffer. It's no one's fault but your own." I looked at this polished, privileged boy and suddenly smiled. "Caleb, there's something I've wanted to do for a very long time. It goes against everything I was taught about being an officer and a gentleman, but apologies in advance." I tossed my acceptance packet aside, grabbed the collar of his designer shirt, and punched him squarely in the jaw. As he staggered back, I followed with a sharp kick to his stomach that sent him flying several feet. Caleb collapsed on the ground, groaning. I calmly walked over, picked up my packet, and brushed off the non-existent dust. "You, in your gilded cage," I said, my voice low and final, "can stay the hell out of my life." Life at West Point was challenging and deeply fulfilling. Not only did I have access to a world-class education, but I also found a company of like-minded cadets, my brothers and sisters in arms that IT often reminded me of my days in the Navy. In my junior year, my academic performance earned me a spot on a special aerospace engineering project. The lead advisor for the project was none other than the female engineer from NASA who had written to me. She was a brilliant, kind, and witty woman in her middle age, whose grace and intellect showed me the strength of modern American women. She became my mentor and my friend. I later enrolled in graduate school under her supervision, officially beginning my journey as a researcher. During the summer after my undergraduate graduation, I started work early on one of my mentor's projects and was completely swamped. Mr. Vance called, asking me to return to Boston for Caleb's wedding. If he hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten the man existed. I had almost no contact with the Vances during college. The last time we'd spoken was during my sophomore year. I politely declined the invitation. Several years later, after completing my Ph.D., I took a position at a military research institute, recommended by my mentor. One day, Mr. Vance called again, his voice pleading. "It's your mother's 50th birthday party. You have to come, don't you? Ethan, your mother and I aren't getting any younger. Are you really going to let us die with this regret?" I was silent for a long moment. "I'll request leave," I finally said, "but I can't guarantee it will be approved." When my mentor, who treated me like her own son, heard about it, she stormed into her superior's office and practically threw a tantrum to get me the time off. I was both amused and deeply touched. I returned to Boston on the day of the party, accompanied by a plainclothes security officer. Mr. and Mrs. Vance were overjoyed and wanted to parade me around to their friends, but I declined. Based on my alma mater and the sharp, dangerous aura of the man by my side, they probably guessed enough about my work not to push the issue. I sat at the main table, quietly waiting for the evening to end. The Vances had never formally introduced the original Ethan to Boston's high society, so I recognized almost no one at the party. The banquet was well underway when Caleb and Brooke finally made their grand entrance. Brooke, clad in a designer gown, was storming ahead angrily, while Caleb trailed closely behind her, trying to explain something, a look of barely concealed frustration on his face. It seemed the fake prince's marriage to the real princess wasn't the fairy tale one might imagine. I glanced at them once before turning away. When Brooke and Caleb reached the main table, Mrs. Vance was smiling a careful, ingratiating smile as she placed a piece of food on my plate. Caleb looked shocked to see me, his expression unreadably complex. Brooke, however, seemed to have all the fight taken out of her. She sat down silently, shooting furtive glances my way. I vaguely remember my research assistant mentioning that someone named Brooke Lynn had sent me an apology text when he was clearing out my old phone's data. I hadn't paid it any mind. Around 9 o'clock, as the party was winding down, I stood to say my goodbyes to Mr. and Mrs. Vance. A young woman was standing next to Mrs. Vance. "Ethan, You're leaving? She said quickly. This is Chloe Carter. Her family are old friends. She just got back from studying abroad and has traveled all over the world. Why don't you two sit and chat for a bit? Chloe Carter didn't object, just smiled warmly at me. The intention was obvious. I looked at my mother and sighed. Mom, Miss Carter, I am a soldier. Do you understand what that profession entails? Do you know the responsibilities and duties that a military spouse has to bear? Mrs. Vance froze. The smile on Chloe Carter's face faltered. I gave them a slight nod and turned to leave. In the garden outside the ballroom, I found Caleb smoking a cigarette. He scrambled to his feet when he saw me, then quickly composed himself and stubbed out the cigarette. You must be feeling pretty smug, Ethan Hayes. I walked past him without breaking my stride, without giving him a single glance. Earlier at the party, I had overheard snippets of gossip from a neighboring table. After Caleb and Brooke's wedding, the two family businesses became more deeply intertwined, and the constant conflicts of interest had driven the families apart. Mr. Vance and Mr. Lynn were now corporate rivals, and Caleb was caught in the crossfire, a pawn in their game. Brooke, who only cared about her social life, constantly complained that Caleb was useless and couldn't help her father. Mr. Vance no longer trusted Caleb completely either, suspecting him of leaking company secrets to his father-in-law. In all these years, Caleb had not succeeded in inheriting the family empire. Instead, he was living a life of quiet desperation. But what did any of that have to do with me? Our paths had diverged long ago. Back at the Research Institute, I immediately immersed myself in my work. Through years of effort, I had gone from being the youngest researcher to the youngest graduate advisor. Like my mentor before me, I would pass my knowledge and passion on to the next generation, leading more bright minds to shine in the field of scientific research, adding my own small contribution to the great project of building the nation. My name would not be widely known. The projects I led and participated in were mostly classified. But what did that matter? I knew that what I was doing was honorable and vital. My mentor, hearing that my trip home had failed to solve my bachelor problem, charged into my office. When I was your age, my kids were already running errands. I finished for her. She glared at me. You're this old and not married. Are you afraid of commitment? I interjected again. I brewed her a cup of chamomile tea. All this worrying will give you wrinkles. Look, you've got a new one right there. She gasped in horror, snatched the mug, and scurried back to her own office. I smiled and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath. I hadn't been sleeping well lately. As I closed my eyes, a wave of drowsiness washed over me. In a hazy space between waking and sleep, I thought I saw my home from my past life. It was a classical estate with pavilions, gardens, and even an outdoor stage. The front courtyard had trellises and bamboo fences, with peonies and herbs growing in neat rows. My father was there, sternly scolding my younger siblings for some mischief, while my mother watched from the side, a gentle smile on her face. The scene shifted. I was at the Battle of Midway. Vastly outnumbered and outgunned, we didn't flee or surrender. We formed up to meet the enemy head-on, determined to fight to the death. Then came the fire, the thunder of explosions. Before I knew it, the ship was going down. The entire fleet was lost. In that final moment, as I faced death, it was as if I had a dream. In the dream, the nation was at peace, the land was beautiful, and the seas were calm. My fellow officers and I had returned home. My mother brought out steaming bowls of noodle soup. My son, she said, her voice thick with tears. You're back. It's good to be back. It's good to be back.